Tonight, protesters versus politicians. Hundreds demand Australia condemn human rights abuses as Asian leaders meet in Sydney. Darwin takes a pounding as tropical cyclone Marcus crosses the coast. A horror holiday. Skiers are flung from an out-of-control lift as others jump for their lives. And you're not seeing things. The cattle invasion of Bondi Beach. Good evening, Jeremy Fernandez with ABC News. Australia has rolled out the welcome mat for its neighbours as leaders from across Southeast Asia gather in Sydney for ASEAN. They've held talks about how to expand economic ties and vowed to boost cooperation in the fight against terrorism. Reporter Stephen Jedgetts joins us from Darling Harbour, where the ASEAN leaders are meeting tonight. Stephen, security's been tight and there have been protests as well.
That's right, Jeremy. There have been protests. Hundreds of people rallied here in Sydney to express their anger at the crackdown against both politicians and journalists in Cambodia and in Vietnam. They're not the only countries in the centre of this storm. Protesters have also targeted Aung San Suu Kyi, the informal leader of Myanmar, accusing her of presiding over the ethnic cleansing of Rohingya Muslims in the nation's northwest. Still, the protests didn't disrupt the main game of the summit, which was still diplomacy. A maritime power conducting diplomacy at full stride. Malcolm Turnbull's invited 10 leaders to Sydney and is mounting a charm offensive. There is a point to this flurry of choreographed handshakes. Australia wants to beef up its ties with the main players in Southeast Asia as it hedges against China's rise.
Australia and our ASEAN neighbours share a commitment to open markets and to free trade, to stability and to security.
Those values are now contested, and charting Australia's strategic direction isn't easy.
The centre of gravity of world economy has been moving from Atlantic toward the Pacific.
Meanwhile, a confident Indonesian president took the chance to crack jokes about politics in a digital age.
Since the arrival of Netflix, we politicians have no choice but to turn politics into reality TV. Because if we don't, all of you will watch House of Cards.
While others struck a darker tone.
A nation cannot be assured of its own safety while there are threats at its doorstep.
I hope, Mr. Dutton, that includes the murder of 46,000, is it, Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar? Just saying, it's a lot of people, and when you throw little kids into fires and let them burn to death, it's what some people might call cruel. And if you don't speak out against that and name that as terrorism, then what are you doing?
When Islamic militants occupied the city of Marawi in the Philippines, it was a powerful reminder that Islamic State's offshoots could still pose a threat to the region. ASEAN nations have now promised to boost cooperation and share information to stem the flow of money and foreign fighters to terrorist groups. While it's all polite smiles and diplomatic language at the ASEAN summit, outside the building it's a different story. Several diaspora communities from a number of ASEAN nations, including Vietnam, Cambodia and Myanmar, are furious about the erosion of democracy and human rights abuses in those nations.
My mom, she's 91 this year, and she cannot stand by and see those people suffer. Like when we were going through during Pol Pot, we feel that no one outside was speaking on our behalf.
90% of our population has been...
That's no joke. What I said before, they actually did take little kids, babies, baby boys, toddlers, and they threw them into fires and let them burn to death. That's what the Myanmar military did, and Australia's government didn't even condemn that. I mean, it's not just murder, it's cruelty to the extreme of cruelty. I want to tell you about something. Jacob Wertling was a boy from Minnesota, and he had a pet dog named Marcus, who he named after a football player. See, a lot of people worship God as the Almighty, the Great One, the great, dictator? I'm not sure, but God the Almighty, the one you must get down on your knees and worship and glorify, praise as Almighty and all-powerful. Well, Jake worshipped a footy player named Marcus Allen, because Jake was an 11-year-old boy, and he liked footy. So he worshipped Marcus Allen. And Marcus Allen, I don't think he saw himself as being the Almighty God, but he was a bit of a football legend and a bit of a god of football, I suppose. And I think Jake might also worship in the same kind of way an Australian boy named Nathan Breeze. Nathan, speaking of kids burning to death at the hands of military thugs who somehow are not terrorists because they're basically Buddhists killing Muslims, so therefore they're not terrorists because the victims are Muslims, which means the victims are the terrorists, not the people burning the children, but the children being burned are the terrorists. Somehow, that's how it works these days. I'm not quite sure how that works, but apparently that's how it goes. Well, Nathan Breeze, he knows what it's like to burn to death because he burned to death in the Black Saturday bushfires in 2009. And he's a boy that I think Jake worships. Isn't Satan the one that's meant to burn to death in hell? I think so. But anyway, Jake was abducted by a closeted homosexual. Closeted being the bad word there. Homosexual's fine if you're out and you're open and you're honest and you're cool and you're self-accepting. But if you're not, you might just be a closeted pedophile. You might just go out and kidnap a little kid. Well, Jake was 11. He wasn't little. He wasn't big. He's 11. On the cusp of puberty, on the cusp of discovering his own sexuality. Who knows? Maybe Jake was gay. Maybe he was bisexual. Who cares? But Jake, maybe he was straight. I don't know. But Jake had a pet dog named Marcus. I do know that. And Jake would not have had a problem if someone was gay. I know that too. Which is more than what I can say for Peter Dutton. Nathan Breeze, another boy who has no problem with people who are gay, or people who are bisexual, or people who are transsexual, or people who are Muslim. Jake's the same. No problem with black people, because guess what? Marcus Allen was a Negro. He was a black guy. Yeah. He was a black American. And back in 1989, guess what? Racism was almost as bad as it is now. I wouldn't say it was worse, but it was, in the same ballpark, if you know what I mean. Marcus Allen, football player. His name happens to have the same value as Nathan Breeze, if you add up the letters in their names, according to the place of the letter in the alphabet. Add them up, same value. So like I said, Jake had two gods that he worshipped. One was Nathan. Nathan obviously came from Victoria because he died in Black Saturday bushfires. He actually died in his neighbour's house at Kinglake West. That was in, what's the name of the street where Nathan lived? Pine Ridge Road, number 9. And 9 people died there. So Nathan Breeze, 13-year-old boy, Jake was 11. Jake had a pet dog named Marcus. Remember that. They have the same value. Wetterling, Jake's surname, actually means weather, because Wetter is the German word for weather. Wetter, mirror, breeze. Jay Weatherill is the Premier of South Australia, and there's an election there today. Weather, Jay Weatherill. Wetter, mirror, breeze. Breeze is a Scottish surname, and Jake's surname Wetterling is actually German. So it does actually mean weather. And if you add them together, 91 and 61, you get 152. And if you add 15 and 2, you get 17. And what's today? Today is Saturday, 17th of March, 2018. 1 month after Jake's birthday, or 28 days, because it's February. You know, the whole February's less days in the month. So, yeah, 28 days after Jake's birthday was today. So, Jake's birthday, Saturday, the 17th of February. What happened? Cyclone Kelvin formed off Western Australia. And today, Cyclone Marcus made landfall on Darwin. Came and sat right on Darwin. Naughty boy. Naughty boy. Not Marcus. Bad boy. Cyclone Marcus. 152. 15 and 2 is 17. Jake was born on Friday the 17th of March. Of February. You got me. Got me there. Bad boy. Bad boy Marcus. February. Today is the 17th of March. Saturday. So, twin equals 66. As in spiritual twin, maybe. Well, 6 and 6 is 12. And there's two 12-year-old boys in a novel called Red Rain by R.L. Stein. And they're 12. 6 and 6 is 12. Daniel and Samuel are 12. And, you know, Samuel has the same value as Steve. And Daniel is the name of the guy who killed Jake. Twin, 66. And the name Nora equals 48. If you want to know something else that has a value of 48, it would be a rude. Jake is the rude boy. He's the wet boy. Wet equals 48. Evil equals 48. Jake died at the hands of a closeted predator. Gay, straight or bi, makes no difference. He was closeted. He was religious and in the closet. And he was a predator. And he killed Jake. True. Darwin equals 69. Boy Jake equals 69. Red Rain equals 69. That's the novel with the twins, Daniel and Samuel. 16 equals 96. And 16. Well, 16 was the date when Marcus formed. Yesterday, Friday the 16th of March. Destiny 96. Total 96. All little things that relate to the Dark Tower by Stephen King. So yeah, there's some interesting little reflections there. There's a lot of sadness in the Dark Tower, a lot of cruelty. There's a woman named, what's her name, Susanna? She gets burned to death, actually. Nathan burned to death. And there's been all these kids burned to death in Myanmar. It's just interesting to me how they justify not speaking out against human rights abuses and violations. How they justify calling one group of people terrorists but not another. I find that very interesting. Interesting in the same way that murder in general is interesting. Interesting may not be the right word.
Being wiped off, and more than 43,000 people have been killed.
Accusations that aren't likely to be answered at this summit. Stephen Gedgets, ABC News, Sydney.
Darwin has been battered by a Category 2 cyclone. With winds gusting to more than 130 kilometres an hour, Cyclone Marcus brought down trees and power lines, and police were forced to make a daring rescue.
There was nothing meek about Cyclone Marcus, the Category 2 system menacing Darwin with destructive force.
The wind is so strong at the moment, as you can see, it's blowing probably Well, there you go. That gust is probably close to 100 kilometres an hour.
Across the city, the wild weather saw trees come down, roads were turned into rivers, and drivers were forced to navigate obstacle courses.
Shelter or be in shelter or make your way to shelter now. Don't hesitate.
Barbecue bottles became explosive devices, and sparking electricity lines looked like firework displays as 25,000 homes were left without power.
It is quite dangerous out in the Darwin region at the moment. We understand that there are a number of power outages.
A gas leak forced some residents to evacuate, and metal roofs were no match for the wind. As supermarkets shut their doors ahead of the cyclone's wrath, shoppers scrambled to get last-minute supplies.
And all the things are getting closed, and people did not plan anything for this cyclone. They did not expect this cyclone this much fast.
While many rode out the storm in cyclone-coated homes, others were forced to shelter in car parks.
I had to hide myself in a shelter like this.
The full force of Cyclone Marcus still hasn't reached Darwin, but already you can see trees are coming down on some of the busiest roads in the city. Despite the dangers, some found the conditions a novelty.
It's not too bad, just a little wet.
A little bit windy.
Yeah, I had to put my togs on to go for a walk.
But amongst the fun was a real-life emergency after a boat broke its mooring and crashed into another vessel, with 2 people on board, one suffering breathing difficulties.
I'm a little bit worried, of course, but the rescue people are doing their gig.
The pair was eventually brought to safety, but police questioned their decision to be on the harbour in the first place.
Yeah, I don't know why they'd be on boats at the moment, just politely, but I suppose do your best to stay safe.
Cyclone Marcus is now heading towards the Kimberley coast in Western Australia. Jono Gibson, ABC News, Darwin.
And Diana Damjanovic is also in Darwin for us tonight. Diana, how are things looking right now?
Well, Jeremy, I'm on the Esplanade, which is a popular walking track right on Darwin Harbour. Everywhere I look, I can see trees down or damaged, and we've got reports of many power lines down, as well as damaged infrastructure. The drinking water here has been contaminated as well, so residents are being advised to drink bottled water or boil their water before drinking it. From tomorrow, the real muscle is coming through, and that's the Defence Force. They're going to take charge on this clean-up, and there are mounting concerns now for a second system that might impact Darwin soon. There's a monsoon trough in the Arafura Sea, and there are concerns that that could develop into a tropical low and impact Darwin in the next 4 to 5 days.
Diana Damjanovic in Darwin. It was an election campaign that started out with...
Did you notice the dog? Just wandering across the background.
Diana Damjanovic.
Pretty sure it's a dog, not a cat. Anyway, the lady who died in the Dark Tower, her name is actually Susan Delgado, not Susanna. That's another character. Susanna gets her legs chopped off after getting pushed in front of a train by a serial killer, which some people would call cruel, which is kind of what I consider the murder of 46,000 people to be, is a little cruel and maybe worth speaking out against, not just as a protester, but maybe as a politician or someone, you know, like who is meant to represent, you know, freedom, fairness, justice, whatever.
In Darwin. It was an election campaign that started out with some pundits suggesting that Nick Xenophon could become the Premier of South Australia. The leader of SA Best wasn't riding quite so high in the end, with the latest polls showing his numbers crashing. But the only poll that counts has been held today, and both Labor and Liberal leaders are putting on a confident front.
The battle for the seat of Hartley in Adelaide's northeast in some ways sums up the entire South Australian campaign. Former Senator Nick Xenophon's entry into the seat changed the game and made things...
Nick Xenophon hasn't done that well. It's good to see people keep supporting the major... Oh, did you see that? Did you see that? Did you see that? There was a dog walked across the background at the end of this interview. You saw that, right?
Election.
And then the next story, the very next story, the next news story. What do we get? Wait for it, wait for it, wait for it, wait for it. Twin dogs. Twin dogs. And Stephen Marshall Stephen. Did I tell you Steve? The name Steve has the same value as Samuel. And Samuel is one of the twins in the Dark Tower, not the Dark Tower. Red Rain by R.L. Stein. The kids' horror writer. True. Samuel or Sammy, doesn't matter how you write it, Samuel or Sammy has the same value as Steve. And here we have two dogs that look the same. Twins. And they just mentioned there's another system out in the Arafura Sea. Well, that, if it does form into a cyclone, will be known as Nora. And that's what I was just saying. Nora has the same value as evil. Evil Steve, evil Stephen, evil Samuel. Actually, Daniel is the evil twin in Red Rain. And Daniel is the name of Jake's murderer. Daniel Heinrich. Danny Heinrich is what he went by. And strangely enough, the name Danny Heinrich has, or Daniel Heinrich, has the same value as Nathan Breeze. Bit weird, but there you go. Opposites. Reflections. Mirrors. Mirror boy, wetter boy, wetterling. Jake, Nathan, Breeze.
Should have the Liberal opposition miles ahead. Today, the local campaign had help from Victorian Liberal leader Matthew Guy and some pamphleteers from the hotel's lobby.
I'm actually feeling the best I've felt. You know, I've been in this role now for 5 years. I've got a strong team. It's a very united team. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's a strong team. It's a really united team.
Jay Weatherall is also putting on a confident front while fighting for a 5th term for Labor.
I don't think there'd be a thing I'd change about the campaign. I just feel very satisfied with what we've put forward to the people of South Australia. I'm just very interested in seeing what they think of it.
Nick Xenophon isn't quite so happy, with late polls showing a slide in support for his fledgling SA Best party.
It's the hardest thing I've ever done. I've been involved in some pretty hard campaigns.
Liberal leader Stephen Marshall is sticking to his refusal to do a deal with Mr Xenophon after the election. But the SA Best leader says he might speak to his deputy.
If Stephen Marshall doesn't want to talk to me, I'm sure that Vicky Chapman or someone else in the Liberal Party will.
Oh, look, it's another stunt. I mean, what's he doing today? Running around in a chicken suit?
With more than 200,000 South Australians putting in postal or pre-poll votes, the result is unlikely to be known tonight. Leah McLennan, ABC News, Adelaide.
And counting is also underway in the by-election for the federal seat of Batman in Melbourne. The Greens are hoping to snatch the seat from Labor.
See, it would actually be more interesting if you could vote for Batman. Just saying.
Reporter Richard Willingham. Richard, are there any numbers in so far?
Yes, there is. Good evening. There's a few numbers have come in, and currently the Greens have 44% of the primary to Labor's 40%. This is very early, though. I think one thing that's going to be interesting to watch is just how many people turn up to vote. 5 months ago in this same area, there was a state by-election, and it was only 80% of people turned up, and it's only been 18 months since the last federal election. So whether how many people turn up could swing this election.
There's a stunt. I know a stunt when I see one.
The Liberal Party aren't fielding a candidate. This is Greens versus Labor, so it's going to be really interesting to see where the preferences from those smaller Conservative parties flow.
Richard William, thank you. A state Labor MP has been accused of sexual harassment and will stand aside from some duties while the matter is investigated. Hugh McDermott has been accused of sexual and verbal harassment in a complaint filed by a former staffer to the Public Service Association. The staffer claims Dr McDermott pushed his groin against her back and brushed her breasts. Dr McDermott denies the allegations but will stand aside from some responsibilities during the investigation.
I do think it's appropriate that Hugh McDermott stands aside from his Waste Watch responsibilities. They are additional responsibilities I gave him a couple of years ago.
The state government has called on Mr Foley to immediately suspend the MP from the Labor Party room pending the investigation.
What do you reckon's worse? Would it be worse to, if someone wanted you to spank them, would you, and they really wanted you to, consent? Because guess what? Spanking. The word spanking equals 91 and spank equals 61. So add them together, you get cyclone markers. Just saying. I mean, would you consider that, like, if someone said, spank me, I want you to spank me, and you spanked them, and they were like, "Oh, thanks, that was great. I really enjoyed that. That was awesome." Compared to someone was like, "Don't touch me," and you touched them anyway. You only touched them, just a little touch, but they specifically said don't, and you did anyway. What do you think is worse? And what do you think is better? Jake and Nathan wanted me to ask you that.
A chairlift has hurtled out of control at a ski resort in Georgia, throwing passengers onto the slopes below. Holidaymakers were riding the lift downhill when it malfunctioned and travelled at double speed. Some skiers were hurled from their seats, others jumped to safety. Incredibly, no deaths were reported, but at least 8 people received minor injuries. An Iraqi teenager has been found guilty of attempted murder for planting a homemade bomb on the London Underground in September last year. Ahmed Hassan was on a government de-radicalisation program when he built the bomb in his foster home. Europe correspondent Lisa Miller reports.
Ahmed Hassan was a young-looking 18-year-old, even asked for ID as he bought batteries and a screwdriver, parts for the bomb he was making. The following morning, he left home with the potentially deadly weapon in a bag. He got off the tube just a few stops before Parsons Green, leaving the bomb set to a timer. Parsons Green. It partially detonated, a fireball quickly searing and injuring passengers in the crowded carriage. It was the morning rush hour, and the court heard it was only luck that people weren't killed. Hassan had strapped shrapnel to the device and used the explosive known as TATP, Mother of Satan. He'd arrived at...
Why Satan? Because I'm pretty sure, and I know Putin, Russia, they call their nuclear bombs, these big mother bombs that can wipe out whole cities, no problems. What are they called? Satan 2? I saw one of them was called. Why Satan? Because I'm getting the idea that most of the fanatics that want to go out and bomb people, and Jake and Nathan, by the way, say, forget the consent. This boy needs a spanking. In this case. But anyway, in the case of, in general, across the board, overall, what do you reckon? What do you reckon about religion? What do you reckon about God and Satan? Because most of the wars, terrorist attacks, seem to be done in the name of God, from what I'm seeing, from what I can tell. Putin, Vladimir Putin, does he go to church and worship Satan? No, he goes to church and he worships God, prays to God. So did George W. Bush. The Iraq War was demented. Just saying.
An asylum seeker 2 years before, telling immigration officers he'd been abducted by Islamic State militants and taught to kill. The teenager was put into an anti-radicalisation program. This case raises some real problems for the government's Prevent program, which is intended to draw young people away from terrorism. Here was a seemingly vulnerable young man from Iraq who was supposedly being supervised on the program while he was building a bomb.
He kept it very secretive in relation to what he was doing, what he was planning.
Building a bomb, and I don't think they meant a Bureau of Meteorology.
And nobody around him actually knew what his plot was.
The British government has admitted there are lessons to learn. Lisa Miller, ABC News, London.
Russia is furious about Britain's suggestion that Vladimir Putin ordered the poisoning of an ex-spy in England. The Russian Foreign Ministry has summoned the British ambassador in Moscow to a meeting. From Moscow, here's Europe correspondent James Glenday.
Each day, Evgeny Fedorov wipes his feet on the American flag, walks past an enormous map of Russia into an office with pictures of the president on the walls. Unsurprisingly, this pro-Putin MP is deeply unimpressed by the international response to the poisoning of Sergei Skripal and his daughter.
We know the British response has little to do with the actual poisoning. This is all to do with Russia disagreeing about its current political place in the world.
Many Putin supporters claim Western countries are trying to use the poisoning to undermine Russia's attempts to regain its status as a global power, and some warn it could all end in a full-blown crisis between nuclear-armed nations.
We're ready for this crisis. We have nothing to lose. But whether America and Western elites are ready, we will see.
This close to the Kremlin and this close to Sunday's presidential election, there are plenty of people making those kinds of warnings and espousing those kinds of anti-Western theories, but not everyone in Russia thinks like this.
These Liberal opposition MPs are urging Western nations to punish the Kremlin for the poisoning by putting serious personal sanctions on everyone in the president's inner circle.
This would be a very painful strike on Putin's regime, and in my opinion, it is his weakest point.
And in England, there's a hint those voices are being heard. British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson says his anger is not directed at the Russian people, but
don't you miss the days when Boris Yeltsin was the president of Russia? I know you young ones wouldn't remember, but Boris Yeltsin used to get a bit pissed and dance. Once he was so drunk he couldn't even get off the plane. But you know what? He didn't threaten people with nuclear weapons. Putin, interesting Christian. He used to be a KGB man, other words a communist, other words an atheist. Then he suddenly became a Christian. And Orthodox Christian Church in Russia, interesting bunch, because as soon as Australia legalised same-sex marriage, what did they do? They said, God's going to end the world soon because he's all so evil. Just to give you a bit of an idea on their attitude, their outlook on life and, you know, things like consent and freedom.
People, but Vladimir Putin.
We think it overwhelmingly likely.
What did it say? I'll go back. I don't want to miss what Boris said.
Boris Johnson says his anger is not directed at the Russian people, but Vladimir Putin.
We think it overwhelmingly likely that it was his decision to direct the use of a nerve agent on the streets of the UK, on the streets of Europe, for the first time since the Second World War.
Those comments came as London police launched a murder investigation into the death of Nikolai Glushkov, a Russian businessman who fled to Britain after being jailed for fraud. Detectives say he died from compression to the neck. There's no evidence so far of a link to the Skripal's poisoning. James Glendale, ABC News, Moscow.
In the Philippines, critics of President Duterte's war on drugs say they face a ruthless campaign of intimidation. For one critic of the government crackdown, death threats have become a daily reality. Southeast Asia correspondent Adam Harvey filed this report from Manila.
Protesters in Manila march against President Rodrigo Duterte.
We need to get out of our classrooms and schools, out into the streets, because people need to know how this government has been harassing its own people.
With them is a popular anti-Duterte blogger.
We need to do something about it before it's too late.
Opposing Rodrigo Duterte can be a dangerous business. And not just because we're marching in Manila traffic. His supporters can be vicious.
Jovo Lorio has received so many death threats, she lives in a safe house and is shadowed by 2 armed bodyguards. Duterte supporters hate her because she criticises the state-sanctioned killing of drug suspects.
I just want them to tell the truth. I just want them to stop killing my countrymen. That's all.
In poor areas across the Philippines, somewhere between 10 and 20,000 drug suspects have been murdered by police and vigilantes during the president's 2 years in power.
Yeah, but hey, who cares? I mean, they're only human beings. There's a plague of them.
During the president's 2 years in power. Opposition to the policy is growing louder. President Duterte and his supporters aren't just targeting alleged criminals and bloggers. They're also going after media organisations. online news site Rappler was targeted first by the trolls.
Being on social media in the Philippines was harder to work in than in a war zone because I was getting an average of 90 hate messages per hour.
Only 90 an hour? Jeez. By the way, this prophecy of Jake and Nathan is a message against religious and political hypocrisy and authoritarianism. What prophecy, you say? Well, I'm talking about Marcus, obviously. Oops, sorry.
A month.
The president accused it of being run by the CIA.
I should rewind and let her say what she was saying without rudely interrupting her like I just did. That was a bit rude.
By the trolls.
Being on social media in the Philippines was harder to work in than in a war zone because I was getting an average of 90 hate messages per hour for about a month.
The president accused it of being run by the CIA.
After the president, it was like a signaling effect. Then government agencies started coming after us.
Rappler's political reporter has been banned from the presidential palace, and Rappler's lawyers are fighting government efforts to shut the site down. The intimidation isn't working against Rappler or against Jova Lorio. In a nation where state-sanctioned executions are a nightly event, the blogger says her high profile might be the one thing that's keeping her safe. Adam Harvey, ABC News, Manila.
Now to a publicity stunt with a difference. Graziers moved a herd of cattle onto the golden sands of Sydney's Bondi Beach. Why? It's part of a campaign to make city dwellers aware of the need for more organ donations in rural areas.
They wanted to get city people to pay attention, and they did. As the sun rose over the nation's most famous beach, men and women rode in on horseback, herding about 40 cattle. Megan McLaughlin came up with the idea.
I rang my dad after I'd had a double transplanted kidney pancreas, and I said, I think we should take a herd of cattle to Sydney, to which he hung up on me.
Her father initially thought it'd be too much hassle to get approval for cattle on Bondi Beach, but he changed his mind.
It's all about combining rural health, the bush to the beach, mateship, Australia. Look, we're all in it together. Sickness doesn't discriminate, doesn't care where you live.
But for sick people living outside the city, the process is even tougher. They have to travel long distances to get to the hospital in time for the transplant, and they risk missing the crucial window that doctors give them for the operation. Gary Woods received a double lung transplant last year. It was the second chance he was offered. The first time he missed his flight.
Unfortunately, because of circumstances, roadworks and peak hour traffic, and we didn't quite get there in time.
In Australia, there are around 1,400 people waiting for an organ transplant at any given time.
I guess you can only blame the government a little bit. It's not their job to make people organ donors, but we need the government to come on board and just throw a little bit of support around the place.
A plea to governments from a group prepared to go a long way to have their message heard. Lucy McNally, ABC News.
Marcus. I just noticed something watching this. They're wearing, like, on their shirts, what is it? Hope.
We thought it'd be too much.
You know, the word hope is actually the word that is most connected to Jacob Wetterling, because the Wetterlings, where Jake lives, in Minnesota, a little place called St. Joseph, which is quite a religious name, and I think I've overshot. I've over rewound, I mean. Yeah. Well, Jake's family has a train, a blue train in his house, with the words Jacob's Hope. Hope. Jacob's Hope. Written on the train. And, you know, one of my favourite photos of Jake, he's on a horse. He's on horseback. And it's his last year of life. Not that he knew that. He didn't know he was going to get kidnapped by a sexual predator and murdered a few months later. But it's such a great photo. He looks so relaxed, and the horse looks so relaxed. And yeah, hope. It's Jake's word. Remember that.
Approval for...
Well, you've seen this. I'll forward one back to where we were.
Government.
Getting close. I don't want to overshoot again. So yeah, don't forget the date either. Saturday. Nathan died on a Saturday, and Jake was born on the 17th.
In rugby league, the Warriors have continued their good form with a comfortable victory against the Titans. Last night, the Gold Post saved the Broncos from a late Cowboys fight back. Today, New Zealand was too strong for the Gold Coast.
The Titans faced a tough task against the Warriors in New Zealand. They botched an early try-scoring opportunity as the home team started to dominate.
They won't stop the fuss this time around.
Warriors captain Robert Tuivasa-Sheck was a constant threat running the ball. It wasn't long before he sliced through.
Tuivasa-Sheck, it opened up for the Warriors fullback.
The Gold Coast had the try disallowed due to an obstruction as New Zealand soared to consecutive wins to start their season for the first time since 2009.
Sets it up for Solomon Carter.
The South Sydney Rabbitohs attack didn't click in round one. This afternoon they scored the try of the season so far against the Penrith Panthers. They were in again on the stroke of half-time, leading 14 points to 0. It looked as though Brisbane were in for a long night against one of the premiership favourites, the North Queensland Cowboys. Things got worse when Jordan Kahu suffered a broken jaw, but the Broncos showed resilience to take a 10-point lead. Jonathan Thurston kept North Queensland in it. With less than 2 minutes on the clock, it looked like he'd conjured the match winner.
Thurston, inside pass,
The Broncos victorious in another thriller against the Cowboys, which pleased coach Wayne Bennett, who decided to take a swipe at the media after the game.
You'll never divide us, guys, so stay out of it. Our strength is our club and our people. Thanks.
Brisbane's next match is against West Tigers at Campbelltown Stadium on Friday night. Michael Rennie, ABC News.
A 26-point haul by Chris Goulding has helped Melbourne United beat the Adelaide 36ers in the opening game of the NBL Grand Final Series. The home team produced a strong second half to win 107 points to 96.
After Melbourne United made it 5 wins and no losses against Adelaide this season, the 36ers coach didn't hold back when assessing his team's performance.
Remember I was talking about number 96? The value of Destiny and Turtle and Jake Chambers and 16 and Destiny. There you go, 96.
We're disappointed in probably our effort, for a grand final game. We shouldn't be talking to guys about energy levels.
The home team was dealt an early blow when former NBA player Casper Ware injured his hip in a collision with Matt Hodgson.
He was up gingerly, but this is huge.
Hodgson also had an impact at the other end.
By the way, Marcus Allen wore the number 32 when he played football back in the 80s. That was his number, 32.
The reverse jam!
The 36ers were in a jam of their own when Chris Goulding went on a hot streak.
And remember what I said about twin? Twin? Could there be a twin? Could Marcus have a twin? Is Marcus a twin Poppy? Well, puppies are usually not born by themselves. They usually are litter. And, Cyclone Linda actually died on the Wednesday, the same day that Marcus was born, in a way, because the low pressure that became Marcus began that day. 14th, the same day Stephen Hawking died.
In the third quarter.
Sometimes when the shot clock's running down, someone's got to step up. You got to make a play, and managed to do that a couple of times.
We let Chris run around all night. I think Chris got to shoot whatever shot he wanted to.
Ware returned to the court and finished with 20 points.
Did I tell you how Nathan died in a bushfire? Because bushfire equals 88. The word bushfire has a value of 88. Cruel has a value of 59. Cyclone has a value of 77. Oh, and we're 26 minutes reversed. Dog equals 26. Spell dog backwards, you get God. 91. Well, you know what equals 91. Wetter, mirror, spanking. I think someone got spanked.
I didn't think I was going to get back in there for a minute, but the physio did a great job, got me ready for that second half, and I can't say enough about our team. They really didn't need me. We were up when I was off.
The 36ers say they'll be a more committed team when the best-of-5 series resumes in Adelaide tomorrow.
I think it's just manning up and playing with more intensity, more effort out there.
More intensity and effort. Yes, more intensity, more effort. What can I do with those numbers? 101 is the value of Christian, and it's the value of slave boy. God, dog, 26. Christian, slave boy, 101. Fantasies equals 94. Bad boy is 49. Flip it around.
In Adelaide tomorrow.
What's 103? You saw that? 103? Didn't come up for long.
Just manning up and playing with more.
103 is hopping mad. That'll work.
In Adelaide tomorrow.
I think it's just manning up and playing with more intensity, more effort out there.
Melbourne United's score of 107 was the highest in a grand final since 2009. Duncan Huntsdale, ABC News.
Reflection equals 107. Jake Chambers equals 96. The same as 16, destiny, and total. Reflection, destiny.
Australian Simon Patmore has added another medal to his tally at the Paralympic Games in Pyeongchang, taking bronze in the banked snowboard slalom. The 30-year-old won a gold medal in the snowboard cross earlier this week. Patmore finished third behind American Mike Miner and Austrian Patrick Meerhofer.
No, it's not going to be a double gold medal performance at these Winter Paras for Simon Patmore.
I had so much fun. Yeah, I just made it a fun day, and it turned out to that I got a medal. So yeah, I was really.
Do you want me to go silly now? Because Jake came from the land of ice and snow, which is Minnesota. Jake equals 27. Jake was 11 years old. What equals 52? Devil. And Jake was born in 1978. Angelic. Demon equals 51.
I had so much fun. Yeah, I just made it a fun day, and it turned out to that I got a medal. So yeah, I was really happy.
Patmore's bronze has taken Australia's medal tally for the Games to 4. You wouldn't know it from the surface, but rivers and waterways can be a gold mine for collectors of antique bottles.
Okay, let's skip the bottles. I think we should skip the bottles. And I think we should skip the weather, because we know about the weather. We know what the weather did, don't we? Let's just go with the end of the news. End of the news. Jacob, by the way, equals 31. 31. The value of Jacob. The name, Jacob.
And that is ABC News for now. From all of us on the team, enjoy the rest of your evening.